Welcome to the Delingpod with me, James Delingpole. And I know I always say I'm really excited about this week's special guest, but I am. I love this man, and I owe him a podcast. I mean, the number of months I've been saying to myself, you must get David Kurten on the podcast. He's a great guy. David, one of the things I like about you is you're about the only politician or the only leader of any political party or whatever that I've seen at anti-lockdown demos. I mean, they should all be there. They should all be. Where is Nigel bloody Farage, for example?
Well, this is what I think. I mean, it's astonishing that all this is going on in our country, that our civil liberties have been taken away and destroyed, and there's nobody there from politics apart from me.
You're sounding quite fuzzy. I don't know. Just
sorry. Okay, should I just move this up? I don't know if that's is that better?
Probably sounding a bit better. Yeah, because particularly for the audio, people will just get they're always having a go at me. They're always whining about my sound and stuff. And
okay.
I'm not a sound engineer.
Okay,
tell me, or rather tell us, for those who haven't a clue who David Kurten is, you lead the Heritage Party?
Yeah, that's right. It's a new party, and we started setting it up in the summer, announced it in September, and I set it up to be a socially conservative party because there just isn't one of those in the United Kingdom. You've got the Conservatives are supposed to be conservative, but they're anything but. And there's a lot of people who vote for Labour in the traditional heartlands who are actually very socially conservative, but the Labour Party long ago abandoned the labouring man. So that's why I set up the Heritage Party as a party that will defend and speak up for our heritage, our history, our culture, and so on, and free speech and liberty, which has become increasingly important this year with all of the COVID situation. And I wouldn't say COVID itself, but the response to it from the government, which has been absolutely appalling.
Yeah, you totally get that, and I respect you for that, because what we need, I think you'll probably agree, what we need now more than anything is a kind of political movement which reacts to this. I mean, we've got a situation at the moment where our two main political parties are both dedicated to the destruction of the British economy. I mean, the Conservatives are bad, but if you're looking for opposition from Labour are saying, yeah, we should lock down even harder than we are. They're not saying end the lockdown now.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. I mean, you might expect this from Labour. I mean, I don't know even if they would have done this, but the Conservatives have been absolutely shocking. But Labour are doing the same thing in Wales, and the SNP are doing the same thing in Scotland. So it's
that's true.
They're all working together. So they would do exactly the same thing whoever was in power. But I mean, I first saw this happening in March, and I thought, look, there's something wrong with this here, because just on one day, the media narrative suddenly changed, and it was all, let's go to lockdown. If you don't agree with us, you're an idiot, you're selfish, you're a fool, whatever.
You're a Covidiot.
Yeah, that's a word that they made up. I heard that as one of these new smear words that they've made. So right back then I thought this is wrong. And initially it was because of the destruction of civil liberties that this was going to bring in. I mean, if this really were something that was a serious disease like the Black Death that killed a third of people in Europe, I might say, okay, we need to have a few restrictions. But this is clearly nothing like that at all. This is just like what happens in a normal season.
I would contend, David, that even if this were the Black Death, and even if a third of the population were being killed, that still would be no argument for lockdowns, because we know, for example, that the vaccine that they've come up with doesn't stop you catching or transmitting COVID, because if it did, they wouldn't be saying you've still got to socially isolate and you've still got to wear your masks, although those are ineffective too. But Also, we know, because there's at least 30 studies on the subject from around the world, telling us that lockdowns do not work. Some of the countries that have had the strictest lockdowns, for example, Peru, Argentina, have also had the highest death tolls. So there's no correlation between lockdowns and low mortality. At the other end, you've got Sweden, which didn't have a lockdown, but which has had mortality rates not dissimilar to those experienced in very lockdowny countries. It seems that this virus does its own thing, and probably this is what happened with the Black Death as well. That it seemed to strike some people. I've just been reading my Bernard Cornwell. It's set in 1346, where when the Black Deaths first started going around Europe, and it was odd the way it just sort of took some people and didn't take others, and the ones that survived, well, the plague became endemic in the population, and not everyone died. They acquired immunity, which is what happens,
Yeah.
and there we are. So even if we were having the Black Death, or even if we're having the Spanish flu, I still think lockdowns are wrong, right? And I hope you do as well.
Yeah, I would agree. I mean, now it's really a moot point because Black Death actually is a bacteria, and now we have antibiotics, which you didn't have in those days. So I mean, now we can.
Oh,
we
that's
can
a good point.
Yeah, we
So,
can treat
yeah,
it.
you
Now.
had bubonic plague and you had pneumonic plague, didn't you? You had the two different sorts. One which was spread by breathing, and one was spread by flea bites. Is that right? Sounds like you're more clued up than I am.
I don't know too much about the pneumonic plague, but the bubonic plague, yeah, that's the one that's spread by flea bites, I think. So yeah, that can be killed with antibiotics now, which yeah, so that's not an issue really anymore. But
so maybe a better example would be the Spanish flu, which
yeah.
did kill at least 10 times as many people, certainly as a proportion of the population, than this pandemic has done, and we didn't close down the global economy then, did we?
No, we didn't. No, not at all. It took its toll, and again, I think people with underlying health issues probably were affected more. You got another example of the Hong Kong flu in 1968, 1969, and everyone was just getting on with life and going out to these big festivals during the season, and nobody seemed to even think about it. They just people were getting on with things, and so this is
I'm thinking 68, was that when the Stones released Paint It Black? I think it might have been. Wasn't Altamont in 1968 as well? The one where the Hells Angels beat a man to death at the race circuit. It was the sort of the death knell of the peace and love 60s, wasn't it? But
yeah.
even so, life went on regardless. Without
it did, and so it should today as well. This is what you've been saying, and I've been saying, and a few other brave souls have stuck their heads above the parapet right at the beginning, and they'll always be honoured for that. And other people have joined in, but yeah, I think some people, as we've gone on, have seemed to have jumped on the bandwagon, have seen, there's maybe a lot of political capital in being anti-lockdown and so on, whereas at the beginning, they kept their mouths absolutely quiet. But
when you say that, David, I would love it. I don't care if people join our side who have been awful at wrong at the beginning, but I'm not sure I share your optimism. I don't think that people are joining us. I think on the contrary, you've got people who were skeptics, people like there was Alistair Hames, who I did a podcast with. He's sort of pulled a Yui. There's the think tankers from the Institute of Economic Affairs, the IEA, a free market think tank run by alleged libertarians, and all these libertarians have suddenly become ardent enthusiasts of big government and the crushing of small businesses and the destruction of jobs through this weird authoritarianism. So I'd love to tell me. I mean, if you're finding people joining our camp now.
Yeah. Well, I
Are
think,
they?
the sort of, I think the people in the Brexit party, for example, Richard Tice and so on, that might have been for it at the beginning. I mean, certainly now talking about the Great Barrington Declaration came out in support of that, as I did as well, so there's one. Um, Julia Hartley Brewer has sort of come on, through the summer, I think, and is now, very much against the lockdown, because of the effect it's having on schools and so on, these kind of things,
Yeah.
good on that side of things. But then you say there's others that have gone the other way, which is quite shocking as well. And I think, this year, what's happened is that the government and the mainstream media have added another ingredient to the mix of their propaganda, which is now with the rollout of the vaccines, is like they're saying vaccines are the way out of this. And the thing with that's really diabolically clever, I mean, it's wrong and it's wicked, but it's very clever, is that it's got people who are against the lockdown to kind of accept vaccines because, okay, well, let's all take a vaccine because that's our way out of it. And that's then stopped people from focusing against the lockdown, which is what we should be doing. Because whether there's a vaccine or not, the lockdown is wrong, it's unnecessary, it's disproportionate, it's destructive. But people are now taken on that narrative and are thinking, okay, well, we'll just get everybody vaxxed up and then we can get out of it in April and May or July, which is exactly what the behavioral psychologists behind the government want everybody to assimilate. And some people have done that, which is rather frightening, I think. And I'll tell you another thing, I think, sorry, I'm talking a lot, but another
No.
interesting thing
You can
I
talk.
noticed, with the, back last month in January, there was this whole fabricated argument between the UK and the EU and how wonderful Britain is because we got the vaccine. All the mainstream media who for years and years and years were all completely against Brexit, Europhiles to the extreme, and now bashing the EU because aren't we wonderful? Let's all be patriotic and support our government for getting all the vaccines into us. And that was a very, very interesting sub-narrative that's gone on to try to get, I think, patriotic people and Brexiteers to support the lockdown and the vaccine strategy, which the government seems to be pushing. So there's a couple of things I think that have actually, if you're not really looking into it and you're not keeping on your toes and watching the possible strategies of the behavioral psychologists, these can trap you into accepting the narratives.
That is well observed and well remembered. I'd forgotten about that dirty little trick. In fact, one of my editors said, "Do you fancy doing a piece about how, thanks to Brexit, we've got access to these vaccines?" And I said, "Fuck off. I'm not writing a government propaganda article, which is actually all I'll be doing." You're absolutely right. It stank. In fact, I think the whole business, and you might agree with me, despite being a fellow ardent Brexiteer, that when I see a conservative columnist exulting or just discussing Brexit generally, I reach for my shotgun. Because I know that what's going on here is a distraction technique. It's designed to pretend that we are living in the old normal still, and that somehow Brexit was it remains our priority, and that we've still got this government that we voted in to deliver Brexit, and it's all okay, and we're all free, and government does its job. And I'm thinking, no, this Brexit is utterly meaningless, actually. That you remember back during the days where we were all trying to get Brexit and make it happen, and there were Remainer economists and such like telling us that we would lose X amount of our GDP if Brexit happened. And I can't remember what percentage of GDP they claim we'd lose, but this is the year when in one quarter GDP fell by something like 20%. We've had the worst economic collapse since in 300 years, since the Great Freeze, when the Thames froze over. And I don't think it's over by any stretch. We're living on methadone, aren't we, at the moment? The furlough money, borrowed money.
It
Money
is.
tree.
It's either borrowed from what we have now, or it's we're going to have to borrow it in the future to pay back the Bank of England. You know, that are creating the money for the government to borrow. So yeah, I mean, yeah, you're right. I mean, all these stories come out in the so-called conservative mainstream media saying how wonderful Brexit is, but then, you know, because we can do more business, but there aren't any businesses doing much business. I mean, particularly the shops and the hospitality businesses and so on that have been absolutely decimated. I mean, I think that there's still some manufacturing going on, perhaps, but you know, not as much as before. I mean, the businesses that are doing really well are the massive global corporations, you know, big tech and businesses like Amazon and so on, which have like soaked up the market share from the small businesses, which are getting decimated. So actually, you know, you can ask in any kind of crisis like this, cui bono? I mean, who is benefiting? It is the big global corporations. So they're benefiting. So they've got no incentive to call for an end to lockdown because they're going to lose their market share back to the small and medium-sized businesses as soon as it ends. You know, providing that they still exist and can reopen, which sadly,
I think a lot of them won't.
Yeah, I
So
know.
you're a member of the London Assembly?
Yes,
Is that your job? So is that your day job? You go in there?
My day job. Well, I did go in there. Actually, I don't go in there anymore physically because we're not allowed in the building. It's absolutely.
So, but you get. Are you on full salary?
Yes, I'm still on full salary. Yeah, we didn't have a pay rise this year, so I mean they didn't do that, which is, you know, fair enough. But yeah, I still am. So are the other assembly members and so on.
Are you working for your money? I mean, how do you have sort of Zoom calls or what?
Well, the committee meetings and mayor's question time is still going on, but they're done like this. They're done on Zoom or Microsoft Teams or something like that. So yeah, we still do, and there's still a lot of emails come in and reports that they write and so on. But yeah, but we can't go into the building. So I mean, one of the great things about, you know, it is it's not a very pretty building, but it's in a nice location next to Tower Bridge, and so people can come and meet us, and we can talk to business people and other people from around London who come to the building to you know, to talk about what's going on in London. But we can't do that at all now. So you know, there's this.
Yeah, actually, let me get your perspective. Do you think it's fair to say that London is finished? I mean, I don't see how. Two reasons. First of all, we seem to be entering a new world where the hospitality industry, the pubs and restaurants and stuff, are going to be so constrained by regulations that a lot of people find really off-putting, like to do with masks and one-way things and perspex screens and so on. I wonder whether many of those restaurants and bars that have closed will recover, number one. And number two, you've got the issue of why would you go to London? Why would you commute to London to your overpriced why would you commute to London or buy an overpriced property in London when you can work from home? How is London going to survive?
Yeah, it's going to be very, very difficult. I mean, especially central London, which is in the past was a huge generator of economic activity and you know, income and revenue for the country. I mean, the central zone and Canary Wharf are massively disproportionate part of the economy. I think it's even an eighth or something just in the central London zone because of the financial services industry. But a lot of that's just going to go because, yeah, as you say, the working patterns have entirely changed. And, you know, even if we do get back to a situation where all the restrictions are lifted, people have now got used to working at home. And so a lot of businesses who have got office space are actually cutting their office space because they save money, and it's more efficient for them to have people go into the office maybe 2 or 3 days a week, but, work at home from 2 or 3 days a week. And then people don't have to commute in every day. So, I mean, that's something that may have happened anyway because of, advances in technology. But instead of it happening gradually over 10 or 20 years, it's happened all at once. And I don't think that that's going to go back to normal. But because of that, you say all the sort of hospitality businesses, many of which rely on the financial services industry for customers. You go into work, then you go out and you have lunch or you have dinner, you go to the theatre after
and they've
work,
got money to burn.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, a lot of them are gone already, because we've been in this nearly a year. So many pubs and, cafes and restaurants have already closed, for good. And small shops, they've closed for good. They're not coming back. The ones which, might come back might have some connection to a chain, pub, or a chain of, hospitalities, a bigger parent company. I mean, they'll probably come back. But as you say, no one wants to go to the theatre if you've got to wear a mask and then not sit next to anybody, and or no one wants to go to a pub if you have to stick a face visor on you and you can't go to the bar and you have to sit on your own and all of these rules. I mean, it's just not nice. I'd rather just meet my friends in my house rather than go there with all these restrictions and rules and people barking at you because you're not wearing a lanyard that says you've got an exemption or something. It's ridiculous.
This is what I'm already detecting on social media chat groups, Telegram and stuff. People are saying, right, I'm going to make my own entertainment. And people are forming little kind of collectives of whatever you want to call them, of friends, and their social life in future will be outside the commercial system. So people the market will always find a way. Individuals will always find a way to find a kind of modus vivendi, regardless of how. Even in this behind the Iron Curtain, people found a way, didn't they, of grabbing what pleasures they could, and I'm sure it'll be the same in the new totalitarianism. But it seems to me that we are having a great reset of our economic system. Do you get any sense at all from the London Assembly that people are alive to this problem? Because they seem to be. You've got the awful Sadiq Khan. Do you have to see him every day?
Unfortunately, not every day. I actually only get a very small amount of time every month to question him, because Mayor's question time is only once a month, and we each get 6 minutes of time to question him. So I don't get very much at all, but I try to make the most of it and throw him some pertinent questions about what's going on, and he never or very rarely gives a straight answer and then just diverts into trying to make me look silly or something else. I mean, I asked him about the vaccines the other day, and I which I'm concerned about, because personally, I think they're experimental, they're rushed. I'm not an anti-vaxxer, but I wouldn't take these COVID vaccines, some of which are experimental RNA vaccines, the Pfizer one and the Moderna one. And so I said to him,
are any of them not RNA?
The AstraZeneca one is not. It's more like a traditional vaccine, but it's basically genetically modified chimp adenovirus, which is grown in human kidney cells. So it's not something that I particularly want myself, and not something I particularly think I need, because for all of us, our own immune systems are more than able to cope with SARS-CoV-2. It's the ones who sadly die have an average age of 83, and most have underlying health conditions. So I think it's utterly ridiculous to try to get everybody vaccinated for something that that the vast majority of people can overcome with their own immune systems. That's why we've got an immune system, and it can cope with mutations as well. I mean, the idea that is being put out at the moment that we'll need modifications of the vaccine for every mutation that happens. I mean, that's just ridiculous, you know, in my opinion. So I asked Sadiq Khan about this, and I particularly asked him about, you know, how can you say they're safe when there hasn't been any long-term safety testing, particularly for pregnant women and women of childbearing age? And then he just basically started talking about, there's people who are dying, and how do you think they feel? And he started going into the emotional, telling the heartbreaking stories, but not answering the question. I had to bring him back to you not answering the question and so on. But this is how he deflects, you know, with the answers, and doesn't give a straight answer, for example. But, you know, everybody can see that he's not giving a straight answer, because he doesn't have an answer to something like that. And if he was going to give a straight answer, it would be completely against the narratives that Tory and Labour are pushing together, almost in lockstep.
So, Dave, did you start? Were you in the Brexit Party, or were you in UKIP, or any of those?
Yeah, I was in UKIP. I was in UKIP back in the glory days of UKIP, you know, 2012 to 2016. So I was elected onto the London Assembly just before the referendum. That's when it was. It was, just about 5 years ago now. Sadly, after the referendum, UKIP just went downhill over the next 3 years, and it never became the party I'd hoped it would become. I always hoped it would become a properly socially conservative party, which we need, and I tried to steer it in that direction, but it never quite got there. And now,
well, what direction do you think it went in?
Gosh, there were for 2 or 3 years there were a lot of people fighting each other about what it was going to be. And the thing is, it's had so many leaders since Nigel Farage stepped down. I think it's now on its 10th leader. So with every leader, they sort of tried to steer it in a slightly different direction. There's you remember Henry Bolton, for example. He was a leader, and it got ridiculed for the sort of things that he did when he was a leader, and then
it did,
unfortunately. And
but in a way, do you not think that the UKIP was destroyed by the Brexit Party because Farage knew that he was the crowd puller. And once he kind of dissociated himself from UKIP, that was it. It was game over. He used their pull to big up the Brexit Party.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Yeah, that was a big factor, a massive factor in his decline, because a lot of, he started up the Brexit Party, which I think was needed, and it was a unique time that was never happen again. But everything was just right. All the waves came together for Nigel Farage to start the Brexit Party. Theresa May had betrayed Brexit. There were the European elections just coming up a few weeks afterwards, and everyone was just absolutely incensed at the Conservative Party, and so he started that up. They ran an amazing campaign. You got to hand it to them. Back in May 2019, really
it was quite
campaign.
It was quite Trumpian. I thought there were lots of rallies, well attended, with rousing speeches by Nigel, obviously, and by unlikely guests like Václav Klaus, for example, the former Czech president, who's an ardent libertarian and sort of anti-communist. I mean, I think he's one of the few global politicians who really gets it, because he's lived under communist oppression, so he knows whereof he speaks. A lot of them are just they'll blow with the wind, won't they? I think, and I'm afraid to say I would include Nigel in that category. There's no question, in the early days he helped fight, put leaving the EU as an issue on the map, and he fought a good fight. But in the last 18 months, he's been almost my biggest disappointment. You saw him clapping like a demented seal for the NHS. When we had to go through this kind of cultural revolution type compulsory display of worship for the dear leader of the NHS. Or maybe I'm confusing it with North Korea, but it felt pretty totalitarian to me. And then he really hasn't held the government to account. He hasn't called them on their lockdown policy or on their mask policy or any of this else. Why do you think he's been such a wet fart?
Yeah, it's a mystery to me, because back in the day we were in UKIP together. I mean, it was fantastic, but yeah, since then, it was the Brexit Party was a very strange phenomenon because it did so well in the European elections, and then a few months later, 6 months later, in the general election that Boris Johnson won, he said he wasn't going to stand. He pulled out, almost crushed the party, and handed power on a plate to the Conservatives.
Yes. Now, what's your theory there? You must have a theory.
I was actually still standing for UKIP in those elections because after they pulled out, I saw an opportunity to try to, be a candidate myself. So I stood in, Bognor Regis and Littlehampton, where I'm from, but unfortunately didn't do very well because everyone just rallied to the Conservatives. I mean, there's two theories, and I don't know which is the correct one. Some people think.
Tell me the two theories.
Some people think, he did it for Brexit. He did it because, Brexit was everything and all, and this was the only way to get Brexit. Other people think he did a deal, behind closed doors with the Conservatives, and everything he did handed power to them, and that was some kind of deal. I mean, I don't know one way or the other. I mean, because I'm not party to the conversations which were had. I was never.
Oh no, he keeps his
Brexit party.
He keeps his cards close to his chest. See, my other problem was I think Farage is controlled opposition. I don't trust him at all. I've in the past I found him very agreeable company. He used to be a Thatcherite. I think he used to be where I am politically, although I wouldn't describe myself as a Thatcherite particularly now, but he believed in limited government, personal responsibility, free markets, all the sort of the basic things that I think we on the what you might loosely call the right ought to believe in. But I've had quite a few dealings with him over the years, and I don't trust him. I think he's controlled opposition, and I think worse than that, I think he is totally dog in the manger. He loves to destroy any insurgent parties that aren't under his control, and in a way, he's actually harming the system at the moment, because what he's doing is, by still sort of making out that he is a political alternative, he's attracting votes that might otherwise go towards people who would genuinely resist this tyranny, and he's not doing that. But what he's doing is he's helping to kill the chances of people like you and people like Lawrence Fox with his party. I mean, they've even got similar names, haven't they? What the Brexit party is now called the
Reform UK.
Reform.
Yeah.
And Lawrence Fox's party is called
Reclaim.
Reclaim, exactly. I mean, they're bloody similar, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
It's like if you wanted to name your party something to screw up Lawrence Fox, that would be the thing to do, wouldn't it?
Yeah, it would. I mean, it's. I announced the Heritage Party publicly at the end of September, and then Lawrence Fox announced his Reclaim a couple of days later, and then that's what I said earlier. About a month or a month and a half later, Nigel Farage, who had deactivated the Brexit Party, which is why I did this, because they weren't doing anything. Suddenly says, "Oh, I'm going to bring the Brexit Party back to life, and we're going to rename it Reform, and change politics for good," which is what they said. And I bought into that propaganda back in 2019, the whole change politics for good, we're here to stay, but they weren't here to stay, and then they deactivated. But then suddenly something viable comes along, and then he activates the party again. Yeah, change politics for good, and we're going to reform everything. We're anti-lockdown. When actually there's genuine grassroots anti-lockdown movements. Well, I'm not a movement. I'm a political party. With a full manifesto. And like you say, this is. There is controlled opposition around, and it doesn't surprise me that the powers that be will deliberately try to split the vote of any challengers. And I've seen this with the London elections. I said last January, it was just over a year ago, I'm going to stand for the London Mayor and Assembly elections, and there was no competition at all for 7 or 8 months, and then suddenly there's Brian Rose, and there's this other woman called Farah London, and then Richard Tice is thinking of standing for it as well, and the UKIP have stuck a candidate in called Peter Gammons. I didn't even know UKIP was thinking of standing, but suddenly you got 3 or 4 candidates who are representing similar things to me, but they didn't come to say, "Oh, look, can we work together?" They're just setting themselves up as opposition. And so some of them are probably genuine individuals, but some of them I wouldn't be surprised if they were controlled opposition funded by, the Tory donors and so on, which are there to split the vote.
Mm. Well, not that I really care. Because I think is Sadiq Khan standing again?
He is. Yeah, he's standing.
So he's going to win.
Oh,
because
we've got to try and stop it.
Well, of course we have.
The possibility is I've got to go for it. Got to try to.
David,
stop
I would like nothing more than for you to be mayor, and I'd much prefer you over ghastly Sean Bailey, who's just another squishy conservative, probably hasn't got a conservative bone in his body, or at least not a kind of, not on the terms I outlined earlier. He's just going to be more of the same. But I mean, you haven't got a chance.
No, well, I have to be positive, James. I'm being positive. I'm going for it. I'm going for the win. But obviously, it's you've got to understand the reality of the situation.
I wouldn't vote for you.
You wouldn't.
One reason I wouldn't vote for you is the one reason I wouldn't vote for you is
the
sound is still it's your sound is still really shit on that microphone. I mean, I know it's important that you prepare for your future career as a telephone salesman telephone. What do they call the people who sit on the end of the telephone and answer your queries?
Operators or something. Yeah.
Well, whatever.
I don't know.
But I mean, this is bad coming from me because I'm famous for my bad production quality. But I would say that your microphone is not doing its thing.
Wow.
Because actually, in real life, you've got you're quite you've got quite a presence, and I think it's diminishing you slightly because it's making you sound like slightly reedy, which you're not.
That's terrible, isn't it? I'm going to have to sort that out. I'm glad you told me.
Yeah, it is. Well, look, honestly, how much of those did that equipment cost? Those headphones?
It cost about £25 or something like that.
Yeah, £25 from Mr. I was about to say Mr. Byright, but Mr. Byright, did they do men's clothes? I forget. Do you remember Mr. Byright?
I don't. Is it like Poundland? Is it?
It was spelled Mr. and then Byrite. I don't know what. There's a whole world that one is completely forgotten about. The world before. I mean, Klaus Schwab is right in one respect. We are going to talk about the world before COVID and after COVID. And basically, before COVID is the entirety of Western civilization, and after COVID is just this new kind of totalitarian technocratic terror. I'm so bleak about things. I don't know about you. Do you find any cause for optimism anywhere?
I see some things happening in Europe. I see more resistance in some of the countries like the Netherlands and Austria. They're going out marching in the streets of Vienna every weekend with huge demonstrations. I see pushback in Denmark. There's a lot of people going out there marching, banging their pots and pans. Denmark still wants to bring in
Not for the
vaccine
NHS.
passports. No, not for, actually for freedom. Thank goodness, which is what we should be banging our pots for. Not the sort of they clap for the NHS, dear oh dear. But there and there's Florida. You've got Governor DeSantis who's like, we're not enforcing any of these rules. People are just going out.
Florida, yeah.
Yeah, South Dakota, you got a really good governor there who's like, never done any lockdowns or masks. So there are small areas of the world where people are resisting, but this country, I mean, what on earth has happened? I mean, it's there was some resistance back in the summer, and I was part of it. You had these wonderful freedom rallies in Trafalgar Square. I spoke at one of them on the 19th of September, and these were the ones where the police came in with like squads of riot police
they came in hard
crowds, and they've been so brutal in London. It's been so shocking, but I think people are actually now genuinely terrified of, either being attacked by a policeman or getting one of these draconian fines, which was 100, and then it was 200, and then 1,000. Now it's up to 10,000. This really is totalitarian, the governance that we've got here from I call it the Johnson regime, because it is like a regime now. It's not like a government at all. But I think when the weather gets a bit warmer, I hope that we'll start to see more resistance like this again in this country. But I just think that there's a growing under the surface tension. I wouldn't call it a rage, but an opposition. We're just a dissatisfaction. I think this could bubble up. And we might see people going to the streets again, like they're doing in certain parts of Europe. Barcelona, for example, is interesting because I think there some of the police are now taking the side of the citizens. Some of the police have said, right, we're not going to enforce this. We're actually marching with the citizens for freedom, which is incredible. You really need to, any kind of real resistance to this has got to get the police and the military on the side of the people. And it's crazy that I'm talking like this. Here I am, I've always supported the police and the rule of law all my life. But honestly, these laws are repugnant. They are so repugnant. They're repugnant like Nazi laws and Bolshevik laws. They really are that level of tyranny, and we need to speak out and resist. For
I don't
whatever
think you're exaggerating.
Yeah.
Have you noticed the difference? How do you explain the difference in policing between the way that the light touch policing of the Extinction Rebellion rallies, which lasted days at a time and involved the closing down of thoroughfares, of bridges, and damage to property and all manner of things? We know that the cost in police overtime ran into millions. We know that the economic damage ran into the millions. And yet the police were very, very gentle with the demonstrators. Same with Black Lives Matter. The Black Lives Matter, they vandalized statues. They were threatening. They chased the police, and yet the police sort of shrugged their shoulders and didn't really fight back. But with all the lockdown rallies, the anti-lockdown, the police have turned up mob-handed. I mean, in numbers out of all proportion to the number of demonstrators. And secondly, they've deployed the most aggressive elements in the police. I mean, some of them didn't even have English accents. It's almost as though, I think I've had rumours, I don't know whether you've heard these, that they've been sort of recruiting mercenaries from other countries, thugs, to do this policing.
I've heard rumors of that, but I haven't been able to back it up. I mean, that might be true, it might not be true, but I have seen them. I've seen the TSG in London, the Territorial Support Group. They come in, they're the riot police, and they come in batons drawn, and some of them hit people over the head, and draw blood of peaceful people. I mean, I've been in situations. Most shocking was I was at a small protest. It was in about the end of October in Parliament Square, and there was as many police as there were protesters. They were going in, picking off individual people, and some of them were women. Just women, young women. 20 guys picking off a woman, bundling her to the ground, kneeling on her, causing incredible distress to someone who's just, there protesting, for freedom. And, again and again, they
and
took
peacefully people, protesting as well. There was no violence there, was there?
Exactly. There would be no violence at all if the police had just left people alone. I mean, they were not blocking the public highway. I mean, all of these things have either been on Parliament Square or on Trafalgar Square, not in the roads, unlike Black Lives Matter and Extinction Rebellion. But they've gone in, as you say, mob-handed, and it's been absolutely appalling. But, you see the Extinction Rebellion, it's what the state wants. I mean, they support the whole green agenda 2030, sustainable development. Let's get rid of cars because, the powers that be and the World Economic Forum and so on, they don't like people having the independence of cars to drive around. So basically, they're just useful idiots who are helping them to create a total control system where we'll be controlled because we give up our independence and we just have a bicycle. Well, you're not going to get very far on a bicycle if you're in trouble, are you? So they're actually, I think these people, some of them are agitators, but some of them are just silly useful idiots, and they don't realize what they're actually doing.
Yeah no, I agree with you. It's I mean, we're entering some very, very scary times. Do you think about it? You think only 2 years ago, if we'd been talking about this situation, we could barely have conceived of a scenario in which, when you went on a protest in London about anything, because we pride ourselves on our right to protest and on freedom of speech, that the police would go in hard if you were protesting peacefully. That wouldn't have happened before. I can't remember when it would have happened.
No.
But this was different.
Yeah, it was.
We have got fascism.
Yeah, fascism, Bolshevism, they're all of both of the left. I mean, there's not
they're all the
too
same,
much difference between the two, to be honest. I mean, you think about it. But that's exactly what we have got. And I think the last 5 years in total have been absolutely crazy. I mean, after the referendum, I think that was a big kickback to the global powers that be, that want to, destroy national sovereignty. And people says, no, we want our national sovereignty. We're not having your plans. And we had 4.5 years of them trying to overturn it. And eventually we got Brexit. But I would say, well, it's only really a half Brexit. It's not really a proper Brexit in many areas, but it's something, but it's not everything. But as soon as even before that, we've got this destruction of our civil liberties and destruction of our economy and small businesses going on. And I never would have imagined that this would happen in England. This is what I grew up watching films about what happens the other side of the Iron Curtain. What was portrayed there is what's happening in England. I mean, I went down to the beach earlier today. First time I've been to the beach for months, just to get some fresh air. But normally I'd go and sit in a cafe. Everything's closed, and so it's bleak, as well as a place where we don't have our liberties and freedoms. There's
they don't want you to associate with other people. I mean, that's part of it, isn't it? That they don't want you going to pubs, because then we could be having conversations like this with large groups of people talking about this ain't right. and formulating plans that they don't want that to happen. Tell me, what's your background? What are you, working class? Are you?
I
What do
guess
your
I would
parents
say
do?
maybe lower middle class. I don't know, working lower middle, something like that. I mean, I grew up in Sussex, but not it was on a council estate, but it was sort of with houses. I wasn't in a tower block or anything. To my
Right.
mother, I was with a single mother and my grandparents on her side. My father's Jamaican, but he left before I was born, so unfortunately I never met him. So I was
Right.
brought up in England entirely. So I'm English, British. Obviously with a mixed heritage, as you might say. But yeah, so that's my background.
People can't see how tall you are. I was quite struck by you are quite a presence. Because I don't think I'd met you before that rally that in was it
In
Hyde
Speaker's
Park, I think,
Corner,
Speaker's
yeah,
Corner.
yeah, yeah.
That was one of the first ones.
It was, that's it. I went to lots of those in the summer just to watch what was going on both sides. And you got your collar felt by the police, didn't you? At one of them.
I almost got arrested. Yeah,
Oh, God.
they certainly threatened me but I mean I was there as as a reporter covering it
Yeah,
apart from anything else. But
right.
tell me, here's a thing that's been worrying me as well, to do with, it's clear to me, and I'm presuming to you too, that the Conservative Party is finished as a vessel for people who believe in limited government, freedom, free markets. It's become part of the globalist problem. They've become the facilitators of the globalist elite.
Yeah.
They're completely on board with the green agenda. They don't seem very much interested in free markets or freedom of any kind. That they have become totalitarians.
Mm.
You've got Labour under Keir Starmer, who's a member of the Trilateral Commission, which is behind
Mm.
the World Economic Forum, behind the United Nations Agenda 2030. So they're very much on board with the Great Reset and everything. And we've got Nigel Farage being useless, Richard Tice being fine, but I mean, I don't think it's enough.
Mm.
We've got we've got Lawrence Fox. We're going to need some coalition of
Mm.
rebels to overthrow this corrupt system, and I'm not really seeing that energy at the moment. And what's more, and this is the really thing that worries, I think that the government have been preparing for this for quite some time. And I tell you what, one of the things that really disturbed me, when you take the red pill and you realise that the blue pill world is the construct of the evil machine creatures, that the world is not as it seems. And one of my early red pill moments was watching the way Tommy Robinson was treated. I
Mm.
don't know how. Do you know Tommy Robinson? Have you ever come across him?
Look, I met him very, very briefly once, for about a couple of seconds. So, I mean, I wouldn't say I really
No,
know him as such. Yeah.
no. I first became interested in Tommy Robinson because there was a very, very strong media narrative, um, pursued with the same unanimity and rigorousness of the media's denial that Trump had his election stolen. I mean, the entirety of our media
Mm.
refused to acknowledge that this was a stolen election by Joe Biden,
Mm.
that
Mm.
Trump got all the votes. Nowhere did you read that in even the conservative newspapers. And in the same way, nowhere would you find anyone with a kind word to say about Tommy Robinson. He was a bit like the Emmanuel Goldstein of
Mm.
politics, in 1984, where Emmanuel Goldstein is the target for the hate
Mm.
the everyone can demonstrate that this is the evil against which the regime is set.
Mm.
He is the other. In the same way that I saw Tommy Robinson being earmarked for that role, so I was quite curious to find out how much truth there was. And I interviewed him a few times, and I thought, yeah, he's a working class boy. He's, he likes to fight. He's handy with his fists. He comes from grew up on a estate in Luton. But one of the things I noticed was this guy is not racist. He's got black friends. He's got Muslim friends, because he's grown up in this world where you're not really bothered by people's skin color anymore, or by their, it's not like that. So that sort of brought me up short slightly. I thought, why are they demonizing this guy? And then I heard the background to why he became this political animal, and it was to do with the rape gangs, and understandably they weren't being dealt with by the police for years. So the victim groups, i.e. the white working classes and the Sikhs, who were the main victims of these rape gangs. They started sort of forming street patrols or whatever. I forget the details, but they started out as a resistance to an injustice that the police were not correcting. So I followed Tommy Robinson's career since, and I've been to some of the court cases he's been involved in. Some of them he wasn't as well prepared as he might be, but it was very clear to me that the English justice system was not fair in its treatment of Tommy Robinson. He'd been singled out for special treatment. In fact, I almost think that it would have quite suited them had he been killed in prison. I think they were that. Now, parallel with that, related to that rather, is this: you hear London, some of the London police chief bods talking about the threat from the far right. Now, this thing called the far right, I'm very suspicious of, because I'm often called far right. I mean, what, for being a kind of classical liberal, straight liberty? I'm just, I'm not far right. But there has been this campaign by the authorities to brand anyone who speaks out against the status quo from a kind of freedomish perspective as far right. And I think that they were preparing the ground for shutting down people like you and me and Lawrence Fox and anyone who goes outside the Overton window of the main political parties. Have you got any thoughts on this? Sorry, that's a long way.
No, you're absolutely right, because I mean, when you look at terrorism, I mean, in this country and around the world, the main threat from terrorism is Islamist terrorism, no question.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes up 85% or something of all terrorist attacks or people who die from terrorist attacks. The remainder is about half far left and half what they might call far right, and that's
so the far left are far more active, I think.
Yeah,
I mean, a lot more violence, just on order of magnitude, probably from the so-called far right. You get these little groupuscules of people that seem to have a fondness for Nazi insignia or whatever.
Yeah,
but they don't seem to do much.
But no, I mean, you look.
They don't seem to be. They don't seem to be a threat.
Not. I mean, occasionally there is something going on, but it's usually of the sort of order of magnitude of someone sticks a notice in the letterbox saying "White Lives Matter" or something, and you get the screeching headlines. Oh, white supremacists with this hate message. Yeah. It's just like, well, Black Lives Matter, White Lives Matter. Cool, they're both true. What's the problem? And then they pursue this narrative of like the far right is everywhere. It's endemic. We've got to root it out, when it's not an issue at all. But yeah, the far left, as you say, you've got Antifa, you've got Black Lives Matter. You saw how violent they were in London last summer, particularly on the 6th or 7th of June when there was the protests in Whitehall, where they were intimidating some of the police. They got on their knees, and then afterwards there was a lot of trouble on the South Bank, marauding gangs of Black Lives Matter leftists going and attacking people and robbing people and so on. You know, this was happening. There's in terrible violence, and this is nothing compared to what's going on in America. Even now, even now they've got their guy has won the election. You've still got riots going on in Portland and other places around the United States. I mean, this is all far left. The media don't want anything to do with it. They just pretend like it's not happening. But someone would go around with a Confederate flag and make a little bit of noise, and suddenly, oh my goodness, the far right are here. Call the Marines. It's crazy. But this is a global strategy that is going on, and London is part of the network of cities which are called the Strong Cities Network. You might have heard of it, and
Yeah.
The Strong Cities Network, I mean, it's trying to implement policies outside of the democratic system. And you've got also the what's the other one called? The Smart Cities Network is another network with most of the same cities are in both networks. So the Strong Cities Network is mainly ostensibly to do with counter-terrorism. But the terrorism that they are countering is always far right. So they're completely focused on far right. But then when it comes to Islamist terrorism, it's like, well, we need to tone down what we say about that because we need to make sure there's good social cohesion and diversity and make sure that everybody feels included. So we shouldn't talk about Islamist terrorism or terrorism from ethnic groups if they come from there. It's all far right, far right, far right. Even if there isn't any far right terrorism, the Strong Cities Network is there to actually try to find it and magnify it and create these narratives. And you've got in this country London, Manchester, Birmingham, Leicester, Luton. It's interesting because that's where Tommy Robinson is from. Luton, small town. Well, I suppose it's a large town, but it's not huge in compared to other cities. So how come you've got 7 or 8 towns or cities in the UK, and then in the Strong Cities Network, and one of them is Luton, which is smaller than Plymouth or Southampton or Norwich, and they're not in it. It's very interesting that's where they're sort of focused on, this activity to generate the idea that there's a far right that needs to be fought with the apparatus of the state. So yes, I think that's certainly going on.
It's are you finding any support for your party? I mean, what's your membership?
Well, we're a few hundred at the moment with members and volunteers, so we're very small. We don't have a huge donor like some of the others. I mean, I think the Brexit Party, which is now Reform, I mean, I think they had 17 million pounds or something of donations and income in the last year. Obviously we haven't got anything like that, because we are really grassroots at the moment. I mean, we are. But it's really fantastic. I'm enjoying leading a party. I never thought I would lead a political party, but here I am doing it. But there's people who are joining, but everyone is so keen to get involved and start branches at the grassroots level. So I think the difference between us and some of the other things you've mentioned, Reform, Reclaim, and so on, they're very centralized parties. I mean, the Brexit Party was very, very centralized. I mean, it was Nigel Farage, Richard Tice, and then everyone else was a supporter. There weren't branches.
Oh yeah, totally.
They didn't want branches to form. People get to know each other and have any autonomy, whereas we do. And you can look on Facebook. We got Heritage Party Warwickshire, Nottinghamshire, North East, Surrey, Kent, London. Already we got branches all over the country are setting up, and there's maybe 1 or 2 dozen people at the moment in each, but people are coming and joining, and it's really lovely people who are joined who genuinely care about the country. And what we found in the Heritage Party is that the vast majority of the people are people who've never been involved in politics before, but they think, well, this is just so crazy. We've got to get involved and we've got to do something. We've got to stand as candidates to try to overturn the madness, get our civil liberties back, get our businesses open again, stop, LGBT propaganda going to primary school kids and, make sure we don't have vaccine passports and all of these kind of things that the Tories are bringing in with the help of Labour, and people want to fight it.
There's got to be a market for a party which is in the business of recapturing. I'm not sure it can ever quite be regained, but the old normal, the Britain that we all grew up in and love, and the Britain of, I don't know, the 1958 Dunkirk movie, not the stupid the glossy modern version, and I don't know, Went the Day Well, and just the sort of growing up in the shadow of World War II and the values of those people who stood up against Hitler, and the sort of, when we used to say things like it's a free country, and took it for granted that it was a free country, when people were generally tolerant, but not in that kind of weaponized tolerance way that, whenever you had the Cameron regime talking about what are our British values, and it was, we are tolerant. Yeah, well, maybe we are, but that's not a defining characteristic. I think George Orwell probably covered it better, didn't he, in his Lion and the Unicorn essay, when he talked about all the characteristics. We're suspicious of intellectuals and we're suspicious of demagogues, but we sort of quietly know we're the best without having to boast about it, and things like all this stuff. Now, if somebody like you or Lawrence Fox, or you and Lawrence Fox, or whoever could capture that and bottle it and turn it into a political party, then it would be great. But the problem is it not? And I saw this at going to early UKIP meetings, for example, that if you, I like your decentralized approach, but the danger of that is that you get people with very strong feelings about what your party's policy should be. I remember going to one UKIP meeting and being buttonholed by somebody who wanted to ban fox hunting, and I was thinking, well, I'm not really sure it's UKIP's business to be banning fox hunting, and I'm not sure that you should that you should be in UKIP if that's what you think it is. We should be thinking about bigger pictures than that, about limited government and about protecting ourselves from arbitrary authority, which is what we're experiencing now. But I worry about both you and Lawrence, because you're both really nice.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah, but you are nice, but is that going to be enough? I mean, I'm not saying I want you to be Hitler, but maybe I'd like you to have a bit more of Hitler's kind of. What am I saying here?
Strength, I don't know. Well, look and see how I question Sadiq Khan. I don't pull any punches. Okay. I ask him the questions that people want to ask. I've asked him about grooming gangs. I ask him about vaccines. I ask him about the police, bashing crowds with, with the sending the riot police in. I've stood up. And
you? And yeah. I bet he didn't answer that one at all.
He didn't have an answer. He looked really, really uncomfortable. And every time as well, I don't really know. I'll have to ask somebody. I can write to you about it. Because really, I mean, back in September when this happened, there was an outcry, about the behavior of the police. And so I asked him about
what was that?
In the next...
Yeah. So you... I mean, have you got a lot of kind of fellow travellers in the London Assembly?
No, I mean, there's Peter. Obviously, Peter Whittle. I mean,
Peter Whittle. He's good.
Yeah, it was because we were elected both for UKIP in 2016, so we still sit in the same group together. I mean, when we both left, we changed the name of the group to the Brexit Alliance because at the time we were still fighting for Brexit, but we're still called that because we're nearly at the end of the term, so there's no point in changing our name now. But very few others. I mean, there's one or two of the Conservatives who will come up and say quietly, "I really love what you said. I agree with everything you said," but they wouldn't say it themselves publicly because they're so scared of being called Islamophobic or homophobic,
Yeah.
transphobic or xenophobic or whatever. So they won't say all of these things that they actually believe in, which is, really kind of strange. They're so adherent to the party line, which is basically, wishy-washy woke, I would say, in cultural terms. Yeah.
Oh yeah. So I was just waving at my wife to say that yes, a cup of tea would be welcome. I mean, we are English after all. I was. This is quite a tricksy topic. So the other day I had on the podcast a guy called Josh. Did you see the video he made?
No.
It was on Twitter. He was running as he was talking.
Yes. Yes.
He did it, and it was very moving and very persuasive. And he was talking about how his business had been affected by the lockdown, and it was a sort of cry for freedom. And I thought I'll get him on the podcast, and we had a very interesting conversation. I thought he was a charismatic character, and then afterwards, people in my Patreon pointed to his Telegram, and they say some of his stuff was like white nationalist. There were anti-Semitic stuff going on, and I mean that was sort of, that bothered me. Obviously for the obvious reasons. I mean, I'm rather fond of Jews. I'm the other way. I'm massively philo-Semitic. Although I have to say I've started to abandon my kind of Israel is the best place in the world attitude ever since I've seen how they've handled the coronavirus. I mean, they've really revealed themselves as brutal authoritarians. Like everything that the Palestine lot accuse Israel of being, they've shown themselves to be in this their brutal vaccine enforcement. So, but what I'm wondering is, if we are to defeat this menace, and I don't know whether we're going to do it. I mean, I think you understand, I think, and I understand that what we're experiencing is a global coup by some very nasty, very powerful people in the form of the technocratic movement, and they're useful idiots, or they're agents, if you like, they're enablers in government. I mean, I look at Boris Johnson, I look at Michael Gove, I look at Hancock, and I do not see representatives of the Conservative government. I do not see autonomous individuals representing Britain. I see puppets of the next layer up of powerful forces, the technocratic movement, the Trilateral Commission, and so on. This problem is serious. It's going to destroy our economy. It's going to kill millions of jobs that are never going to come back. It's going to create this. People are going to be dependent on the state more than ever before. We'll probably have universal basic income. We might even have these compulsory mRNA vaccines, which could alter our DNA permanently. I mean, it could be really, really, really frightening. And I don't get the impression that people who might be sympathetic to our cause realize how bad the situation is and how desperately we need a united political movement to fight back. I see you as part of that. I see Lawrence Fox as part of that. But I also see these people like Josh, that although I feel uncomfortable with the idea of white nationalism, when it's about skin color, I do very much feel that there is a movement which ought to embrace nationalism itself and embrace the things that make us British, regardless of our skin color, regardless of our religion. I'm sure there are lots of Muslims who would be on board with this. I'm sure there are loads of black people, obviously, because I think a lot of black people don't even think of themselves as, it's true, isn't it? They don't think of when I have a conversation with somebody who's black who's not woke. I don't even see their skin color. They're a British person, aren't they? I mean, they're just we're all the same. So how do we sort of capture people like Josh and stuff and find a formula that enables them to realize it's not just about white nationalism, it's about something more than that? How do we do that?
There's so many people doing really good things, but all sort of separate. I know that's the issue at the moment, isn't it? It's I think it's something that is more of an issue, sort of you might say the traditional right, if you like, or rather than left, although those terms don't have so much meaning anymore, because we're all competitive and entrepreneurial, and we're all doing different things. I'm starting the Heritage Party. Your guy Josh is running across the country. There's people starting the newspapers and so on, publications to fight for freedom. There's all these different freedom groups doing. There's about 5 or 6 different groups who organize rallies, with different characters at the head of them. So we're all doing something, but we're all sort of like, making our own paths, if you like, and it's like a loose connection between us all. But what I'm trying to do with the Heritage Party is something specifically in politics, and I know people have said to me in other things, why don't you get involved in this? We're doing a legal case, and that's fantastic, but I don't think that's my role at the moment to get involved in legal cases. And other people say, why don't you come and do this activism with us? And that's great, but it's not my job. My time needs to go into what we're doing here in politics. And so we do need action across the spectrum. I think we need activism on the streets so that people again see large numbers of people defying these repugnant.
We've got to have that.
Yeah, we've got to have that. We've got to have people taking legal action, judicial reviews. They haven't worked so far, but other cases, for example, against discrimination, if the certain businesses or sectors are not going to give you services because you don't have a vaccine, there's a huge need for people to start preparing and bringing these legal cases so that people are not discriminated against if they don't wear a mask or they don't have an injection of mRNA. But we need the politics as well. So that's what I'm trying to do, is to start a political party that will grow. I hope we'll get so much support that we'll get 10 million people voting for us. I mean, that's my ultimate aim.
Well, I like your name. I like Heritage embraces a lot of things, and it's a nice. It's quintessentially English, isn't it, or British? We've got more heritage than almost anybody, haven't we? We've got heritage coming out of our ears, but heritage embraces not just architecture and art and culture. It embraces Morris dancing and fox hunting and football matches and all the different bog snorkeling, all the different things that people might be interested in, which are I think slowly going to be erased. I'm reading a book at the moment by Bruff Scott. You're probably not into horses. It's called Churchill at the Saddle, and it's a history of Churchill seen through his riding. And I was reading it, and Churchill's mother was a racehorse breeder, and when Churchill was at Harrow, his parents had this fantastic racehorse which kept winning loads and loads of races. And you can imagine what this must have done for young Winston's ego. He must have been a total hero to his schoolmates, and you probably had boys, members of staff, sort of I don't know, greenskeepers, whatever they're called, all sorts of making money out of putting bets on the Churchill horse.
Yeah.
Anyway, in the Bruff Scott mentions the 5 English classic races. Do you know what they are? The classic.
Oh goodness me, Epsom.
I'm going to test you because you were quite knowledgeable about the Black Death.
I'm not so knowledgeable about sport. I don't know. Gosh, classic races. Are you talking about horse races?
The 5, no, they're called the 5 classics, and it's not a kind of, it's not some word that's been in.
I imagine
No.
The Derby.
They're that's one of them.
Okay.
You'll be here, Reg. You'll never get
give up at this because I have no knowledge of this, unfortunately.
So there's the 1,000 guineas, the 2,000 guineas, there's the Oaks, there's the Derby, and the St. Leger. Now, the only reason the reason I mention that is that there would have been a time, probably up until I would say the 1980s, when most people would have known because they're part of our culture.
Yeah.
And can you imagine now how many people would know, even though racing, I mean, horse racing, it's in our blood. Yeah. It's everyone loves a flutter on the Grand National, don't they? Or they did. But is that gonna happen in the future when nobody's allowed to go to the Grand National? I mean, you need the excitement of the horse race, don't you? That's part of I'm sure it spurs the jockeys on. It excites the horses. It's remove that, and what have you got? You've got this sort of sterile sight of horses running around a track.
Yeah, but you'd be there thinking, what am I doing? It's going to be so bizarre, isn't it?
I suppose what I'm saying is that there is so much of our culture that is not about race, or that it's just ours, that belongs to all of us.
Yeah.
And I think that if we can somehow find a formula, find a party that pursues those rigorously and doesn't get distracted by loons who want to ban fox hunting, say, or whatever stupid idea they've got, which is antithetical to our liberties, then we might be onto something. But I'm not seeing it. Oh, the other point I wanted to make was that I don't think we can. This thing that people started doing when they looked at Josh's Telegram feed and saying, "Oh, I'm not sure you should be associating with him." I remember going to one of the early rallies for the lockdown, and I regret saying this, but I did say this. Somebody said to me, "Why don't you speak up at one of these rallies? Will you come and speak up?" And I said, rather snobbishly, I said, the problem at the moment is that the people here, they're all sort of slightly weird. They're all anti-5G, and they're all anti-vaxxers, and they're all David Icke fans. Shame on me for saying that, because these were the people out there from the start who recognised what was going on. I don't think we can reach for the smelling salts every time somebody has a view which might be suspect. We need to bring them on side to channel their energy, not to not to encourage anti-Semitism or anything else, but to recognise that there's going to be a very disparate bunch of people fighting this fight, and we can't afford to lose allies just because we're getting sort of squeamish about this or that. We need to unite to find a kind of compelling vision.
Well, I think that's what's really fantastic about some of the rallies that have happened, where I need a cup of tea. I need a cup of tea as well.
You'll give fuel to the enemy.
I will.
Yeah. COVID skeptic dies of coronavirus in podcast.
Oh, do you know, the other day there was a very sad story of a man who died in Shropshire, and he was a so-called COVID denier, as they said. He's just a normal guy, and he'd liked one of my tweets. and there was a massive story in the Standard about this. COVID denier. He's retweeted me, and he retweeted something from Julia Hartley Brewer, and he liked one of my tweets, and suddenly it's my fault that somebody died.
He sounds like a fascist to me, David. He sounds like he sounds like far right.
Lovely artist, apparently. But yeah, but anyway, that's the sort of the narrative, that's the sort of stories that get made up. I'm responsible because I don't agree with the lockdown and mask wearing. So if anybody dies because they don't wear a mask, which you don't die, my words are wrong there. You don't die because you don't wear a mask. But if someone dies of COVID and then they it's found that they were against mask wearing, it's like, oh well, they're a COVID denier and they died. It's they make horrible sort of political capital out of these things. I know, but what were we talking about before? Must be a very
whatever. But I was going to ask you. I think I've got to eat my toast now. Otherwise, I might get I might starve.
Yeah.
People have got to see what a lovely guy you are. But can so I wanted to ask you. I mean, apart from your dangerously nationalistic iconography in the background there, I see you've got a Union flag, which is pretty much the kind of thing. It's the kind of thing Hitler would do. You've got to admit it. It's like you are literally Hitler. But tell me, how do you get treated? I mean, do they call you far right?
I mean, I get an awful lot of abuse on social media. I've been called all kinds of things, Uncle Tom, the usual things, coconut, all this kind of stuff. I've people who don't know my color, I was in a really interesting debate on a television channel. It was about something to do with BLM, and I was just saying that we should be proud of Churchill, and the other person, they couldn't see me because we were like this, but we couldn't see each other, and they said, from a white man, you're a white man, you would say that. So I get this idea, because I have a certain opinions, of people who don't see me, they assume that I'm white because of my opinions or something, which is it's just sort of unconscious bias, if you like, to sort of put that back on them. But yeah, no, I don't. I used to get called far right more than I do now. Maybe back in the days when UKIP was still going on, I was still in UKIP, and Brexit was still going on. But I don't now. People now now they call me a Covidiot and an anti-vaxxer, and also I'm a granny killer, because I'm responsible for the deaths of people who die from COVID, because I say I don't think that masks are necessary and so on, and I don't think that vaccines are necessary. So the kind of abuse and the lexicon of smearage has changed. It's quite a good phrase, isn't it?
A lexicon of smearage. I bet you're proud of that. Yeah, exactly. That's worthy of Shakespeare. Well done. The lexicon of smearage. Yeah, that's that's good. That's good. No, it's interesting that you do get exposed to this lexicon of smearage, because that's how they roll, isn't it? It's not really about engaging with your views. It's about closing you down. It's about as they would say, if we were on a lefty university course, they would say they were othering you, and they were using whatever, if they didn't know you were mixed race, they accuse you of being a white person, and when that particular insult fails, they'll just move on to whatever's handy.
They used to call me a homophobe all the time, or a transphobe, because I don't agree with Stonewall's policies. It's political. I don't agree with those things, and so that's a very common smear that gets thrown at me like all the time. I mean, I think I keep Pink News in business, because they do a story on me every other month because something I've said. But I'm a homophobe, I'm a transphobe, and now there's queerphobe, or that's another one that's just been invented. but I think people have now, like, they've moved on from that, because they know, oh yeah, it's Kurten, he says that, it's just what he does. But yeah,
no, it's great. You've given me a fantastic list of epithets. When I describe who you are, I for the blur below my, I can say David Kurten, transphobe, homophobe, coconut, far right,
Bouncy bar,
fascist,
yeah.
COVID denying granny killer. It'd be great.
See, I'm not such a nice person after all, am I?
Yeah, you are. You are though. You're really nice. That's the thing. Yeah. You exude niceness. It's just like you're a big cuddly teddy bear, and that could be your undoing, David. I'm sorry.
Oh, well, I've survived 5 years so far, so I hope I'll get another 5. In
Well,
politics,
more than that. More than
yes,
that. We need
yeah.
you. David, thank you for being on the podcast. It's been an absolute pleasure. And if you've enjoyed this podcast, please don't forget to support me on Patreon and or Subscribestar. You can find my podcast at delingpoleworld.com. I think there's an archive there, and I'm on. Well, you know where to find me. Yeah. Anyway, again, thank you, David. Great to have you on, and good luck.
Thank you. It's been really great. I've enjoyed it. Thanks, James.
Good. Thanks a lot. Bye-bye.
Bye.